Texas Hill Country, April 1872, the sun was just starting to rise over the limestone ridges when they tied her wrists to the post. Verena Hale did not cry. She did not scream. She stood with her chin high as the sheriff's man laid the whip across her back for the third time. Blood darkened her dress at the shoulder where the fabric had split. The crowd was small. The town of Bramble Creek was too poor and too proud for spectacle, but the man who had demanded the punishment stood right up front, arms folded across his chest. His name was Emmett Tolliver, and he had asked for her hand in marriage. She had said no, and for that, under the town's own law, she was punished for humiliating a man's good name. "Enough," called a voice from the edge of the crowd. It was deep, firm, and unfamiliar. Heads turned as a tall man stepped forward. His hat cast a shadow over his eyes, but the set of his jaw was hard. Dust clung to his boots and trail coat. He looked like he had ridden all night. "I said that's enough," he repeated, voice calm but cold. The sheriff's man looked to Emmett, who just sneered. "You a relative?" "No," the stranger said, "but I'll be damned if I stand here and watch a woman get whipped for having a spine." "She shamed me," Emmett said, stepping forward. She turned you down," the man cut in. "That ain't a crime." Verena's knees were shaking. Her lips were cracked and dry. Still, she looked up at the stranger, narrowed eyes trying to see through the dust and sunlight. The man walked straight to her. "Cut her loose," he said, holding out a knife. The sheriff's man hesitated. A few townsfolk murmured, then someone said, "Let her down, for God's sake." The man cut the rope himself. As her arms dropped, Verena stumbled, but the stranger caught her before she hit the ground. "I've got you," he said, his voice quiet now. Verena blinked up at him. "Why?" "Because no one else would," he said. He helped her into the shade beside the saloon, where he poured water from his canteen. She drank, coughing, and winced as the coolness hit her raw throat. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Porter Ashford," he said. "I was passing through." "Guess I stopped at the right time. Or the wrong one," she muttered, glancing at the crowd still watching from the street. Porter crouched beside her. His eyes were pale green and steady. "You should not have gone through that. I know it does not change what happened, but I need you to know it." Verena looked down at her hands, shaking, scraped, but still hers. "I told him no," she said quietly. "He cornered me in the store, said he would ruin me if I didn't say yes. I still said no." Porter nodded once. No pity in his face, just understanding. "I'm staying at the far end of Cattleman's Road," he said. "Old barn I mended into something half livable. You need a place to rest, you come. I do not know you. You do not have to," he said. "But you got nowhere else, and I do not like the way that man watched you walk away." Verena hesitated, then nodded. She rode behind him on his horse. Her back screamed with every bump, but she stayed quiet. Porter did not speak much either. He just rode steady, his hand behind her to keep her safe in the saddle, not once trying to touch her more than needed. The barn sat in a clearing rimmed with cedars. Inside was a cot, a table, a small stove, and a warm smell of tobacco and horses. He helped her down and made her sit while he boiled water. She watched him work, quiet, sure, like he had done this 100 times. He peeled her dress down gently, eyes never straying. She bit her lip as he cleaned the wounds. His hands were careful, his jaw tight. "You have done this before," she whispered. He nodded. "My older sister, long ago," Verena exhaled. "She alive still?" "No," he said simply, "but she would have liked you." When he finished, he handed her a rough shirt and turned his back while she dressed. Then he set a blanket around her shoulders and poured beans into a tin bowl. "You did not have to do this," she said, voice low. "I know," he said. "But I wanted to." 2 days passed. Verena slept most of the first. Porter checked her wounds, brought broth, and said little. On the second day, she sat by the door and watched the wind stir the grass. Porter was outside splitting wood, sleeves rolled to the elbow, sweat on his brow. Every move was precise, like he was working something out in his head with each swing. "You do not ask questions," she said when he came back. "I figure you'll tell me what matters when it matters." She studied him. "You always this kind," he shrugged, "never saw the point of cruelty." That night, she told him about her mother dying when she was 16. About her father drinking himself into the grave the year after. About working in the general store for pennies and how Emmett Tolliver had always watched her too long. "I was not going to marry a man like that," she said. "No," Porter agreed, his eyes dark. "You were not." She looked at her hands, still bruised. "They stripped me of everything." "No," he said again. "They did not." She looked up. "You still have your name, your mind, your will. You are still standing, Verena." Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "You are safe here." On the fifth morning, she found him saddling his horse. "Heading to town?" she asked. He nodded. "Need supplies? You want to come?" She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "Yes." He watched her a long moment. "You sure?" She stepped closer. "I am not hiding." They rode in together. The town went quiet as they passed. Verena kept her head high. Porter walked beside her like a shield, eyes sharp. Emmett Tolliver was not on the street. They bought flour, sugar, salt. Porter handed the coins over without blinking. When they stepped outside, Verena turned to him. "I want to leave Bramble Creek," she said. "For good." Porter nodded once. "Then we leave." Verena touched his arm. "Why are you doing this for me?" He looked down at her hand, then back at her face. "Because the world needs more people like you." Verena's chest ached, and not just from the wounds. "Porter," she said softly. "Yes." "Would you take my hand?" His eyes searched hers. "Only if you give it." She stepped closer. "I am giving it," she said. He took her hand. Held it like it was made of glass. "Then I will never let it go," he said, and he never would. The cabin Porter had built out beyond the cedar flats had a roof of split shingles and a porch that creaked when you stepped on it. A creek ran 40 yards behind it, shallow and cold and lined with cottonwood. The land was quiet, save for meadowlarks and the occasional coyote call at dusk. Here, the world didn't press in so hard. Verena stood in the doorway that morning, her hair unbound and wind-tossed, watching Porter haul fence posts from the wagon bed. He worked without hurry, stacking them in neat rows beside the gate. There was a steadiness to him, not just in movement, but in presence, as if he answered only to the sun and the seasons. "I could help," she said, stepping down to the dirt. "I know you could," he said, not looking up, "but I'd rather you didn't pull the stitches." "They've held fine," she said. "That doesn't mean test him." She folded her arms, watching him drive a post into the ground with the weight of a sledgehammer. "You always this cautious?" He paused, straightened, and wiped his brow. "Only when something matters." Verena's throat caught before she turned her face to the wind. The scent of mesquite drifted by, dry and wood-sweet. Later, while he fitted rails along the posts, she walked the perimeter of the small pasture, her fingers brushing the tall grass. She stopped by a half-tilled patch of earth where green shoots pushed through the soil. "What's this?" "Beans," Porter said from behind her. "And corn. I meant to get to the rest of it last week." "It's good land," she said. "Soft, first place that didn't feel like it was trying to spit me out." She turned to him. "Where were you before here?" He leaned on the fence rail, gaze far off. "New Mexico territory. Before that, Oklahoma lands. Before that, a lot of places I don't remember right. You running from something?" "Not anymore." She nodded once, then crouched to press her hand into the dirt. It was warm under her palm and damp deeper down. "You ever think about making this permanent?" "I did," he said. "Then I stopped thinking and just started building." She looked up at him. "You built all this alone, had time on my hands." She saw the truth in that. The fence lines were too straight, the porch too square, the rows in the garden too careful. Only someone who had been alone long enough to need order would have done that. That night, after the fire had burned to coals, they sat on opposite sides of the hearth. Verena stitched the hem of a faded dress Porter had found in an old trunk, while he whittled a piece of cedar into something shapeless and smooth. Her eyes stayed on her needlework, but her voice was steady. "I never thought I'd leave Bramble Creek." "I can believe that," he said. "I thought I'd marry some small man, live above the store, die by 40. You still might," he said lightly. She raised an eyebrow. "If you don't eat more than those half spoons of broth you've been pretending is supper." She laughed, then quick, surprised. It was the first time since she'd arrived. He looked up. "That sounds a good one. It's been a while," she said. "You ever think about what you'd want if no one was looking?" She set her sewing down. "I'd want a piece of land, a cow or two. A room with a door that locks. That all," she hesitated. And someone who didn't make me feel small. Porter nodded once, and she watched something pass behind his eyes. I'd want a woman who didn't flinch when I walked into the room, he said. One who spoke her mind and didn't try to soften it. One who'd fight beside me, not behind. Verena's voice was soft. You think she'd want a man who's always halfway to gone? No, he said. I think she'd want one who finally stayed. The fire cracked between them, and the silence that followed was not heavy. When she rose, she crossed to the hearth and sat beside him, laying the folded dress in her lap. I never thought I'd be safe again. You are now, he said. They didn't touch, not yet, but her shoulder leaned just enough to brush his arm, and he didn't move away. The next morning, she woke early and found him already outside. He was mending a broken stirrup strap with a strip of rawhide, eyes squinting against the rising sun. She brought him coffee boiled thick and black in a dented tin pan. He took it with a quiet thank you. She sat beside him on the porch step, knees pulled up to her chest. The horizon stretched wide in front of them, all gold and pale blue. What happens next? She asked. He looked out at the field, then at her. You tell me. I want to stay, she said. Not because I'm broken, but because I'm not. He reached out then, slow and certain, and took her hand in his. His palm was rough, calloused, but his grip was gentle. I'll build the rest of the house, he said. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, room for more. Verena looked down at their hands joined beneath the rising light. I'd like that, she said, and she would, because she had not only found safety, she had found belonging. The wedding was held beneath a live oak, its limbs wide enough to shade half the clearing. The spring air was sweet with blooming verbena, and the breeze moved slow, like the world had hushed to watch. There was no preacher, only an old circuit rider who'd passed through the day before and agreed to say the words. He stood with his hat pressed to his chest, eyes kind but worn, and spoke soft enough that the wind nearly swallowed him. Verena wore a dress the color of river stone, taken in at the waist and stitched fresh at the cuffs. Her hair was braided tight along her crown, the ends pinned beneath a sprig of sage she'd picked herself. Porter had shaved, the clean line of his jaw unfamiliar under the morning light. His shirt was pressed, collar straight. He had mended the button at the neck himself, though the thread didn't match when the rider said, Do you offer your hand freely without pressure or debt? Verena didn't hesitate. I do. Her voice didn't waver. When Porter said the same, his hand closed around hers with a warmth that settled deep into her chest. After the rider nodded and stepped back, there was no kiss demanded, no cheer stirred. Just the two of them standing still, hands joined, and the sound of the wind threading through the oak leaves like a hymn. It was enough. They didn't host a supper or call for music. Instead, they returned to the cabin as the sun dipped low. Porter opened the door and paused, letting her step inside first. You painted the walls, she said, glancing at the pale blue wash that hadn't been there before. I thought it might brighten things. She ran her fingers along the edge of the windowsill. It does. He laid his hat on the peg beside the door. There's more I'd like to do, another shelf, a washstand for the back room, maybe a porch swing when I can spare the lumber. I'd like to help with that, she said. You will, he replied. But not tonight. He made tea from dried mint, and they drank it on the cot, shoulders touching, the quilt folded over both their legs. She watched the firelight flicker across the hearthstones while he traced the curve of her wrist with his thumb, neither of them speaking for a long while. I never thought it'd feel like this, she said finally. Like what? Quiet, but not lonesome. He turned her hand palm up, eyes steady on hers. You're not alone anymore, Verena. And you never will be again. Later, when the lamp was turned low and the cabin hushed, she laid beside him and listened to the rhythm of his breath. Her back no longer ached like it used to. The scars were healing, slow and stubborn, but healing all the same. She didn't need to hide them, not from him. Her voice broke the silence. Do you think we'll ever be able to forget what happened in Bramble Creek? No, he said. But I think we'll make a life big enough it don't follow us through every door. She turned toward him, resting her head against his shoulder. I want children, she said. Not now, but someday. His breath deepened. We'll make room. They rose early the next morning with the light, and Verena pulled her boots on without flinching. The air had turned warmer, and the bees moved slow between the wildflower clusters near the fence. She tied back her braid and stepped out with a spade in one hand and a seed sack in the other. Porter watched her from the porch, arms crossed loosely. "You'll burn in that shirt," he said. "I'll tan," she replied. "I'd rather be brown than idle." They worked side by side through the morning, planting squash in long, curved rows. She pressed the seeds into the earth while he followed behind, packing the soil down with his heel. Neither said much, but the rhythm held steady, and when they paused to drink, he handed her the canteen first without thinking. By midday, they had finished the lower patch. Porter wiped the dirt from his hands and leaned against the fence rail. "You meant what you said about staying." "I did." "You still mean it." She looked at the field they'd made together, the cabin with smoke curling from the chimney and the mule grazing by the creek. "I mean it more now than I did yesterday." He nodded once, then reached for her hand, not to pull her close, just to hold it, dirt and all. "You're not a guest anymore," he said. "This is your home now." She smiled, the kind that came slow and stayed long. "Then let's build it right." And they did. By late June, the rains had come and gone, leaving the soil rich and the creek running fuller than it had in weeks. Verena stood barefoot in the doorway, holding a folded letter in one hand, her thumb running the edge again and again. Porter had just returned from the east pasture, his shirt damp with sweat, his hat pulled low. "You got something on your mind," he said, tossing his gloves onto the bench beside the door. She held up the letter. "It's from Mrs. Greason. She used to run the schoolhouse in Lano." Porter stepped inside, wiping his face on a scrap of linen. "You knew her well. She taught me to read when I was 12, would let me stay after to copy from her lesson books. I always thought if things had gone different, maybe I'd have followed behind her." He looked at the seal, then at her eyes. "What'd she say?" "She's retiring, wants to know if I'd take her place." Porter leaned his shoulder against the wall, quiet a moment. "That what you want?" "I don't know. It's not Bramble Creek, but it's still a town. Small, yes, but it's people, eyes, opinions." He crossed to her, his palm resting lightly at her elbow. "You wouldn't be the same woman walking in. I wouldn't know how they'd take me. Maybe that doesn't matter as much as how you take yourself." The letter crinkled in her grip. "I've gotten used to the quiet here, the steadiness. It's not easy to want more when you finally feel safe. You don't have to choose between wanting and keeping," he said. "You can have both if you want it bad enough." Her gaze searched his. "Would you come with me? If you said the word, I'd pack the mule wagon by sundown." She folded the letter slowly. "I want to go just for a week, see the place, feel it for myself. I'll go with you." "No," she said. "Let me do this alone. I need to know I'm strong without anyone holding me up." He nodded. "All right, I'll keep things running here." She pressed the letter to her chest. "I'll be back before the second moon rises." "I'll be waiting," he said. That evening, Verena packed a satchel with a change of clothes, a bar of soap, and the small Bible her mother had once owned. She left the cabin before dawn, the mare saddled and spirited beneath her. Porter stood at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, watching her ride out without a word of goodbye. She didn't look back, but she felt the weight of his gaze long after the trees swallowed the trail. In Lano, the air smelled of brick dust and horses. The schoolhouse sat just past the livery, its windows shuttered and paint peeling. Verena stepped down from her saddle and tied the reins with hands that didn't shake. Inside, the air was thick with old ink and chalk. Mrs. Greason sat at her desk, thinner than Verena remembered, hair gone all white but her eyes still sharp. "So," the older woman said, setting down her pen, "you finally made your way where you belonged." "I'm not sure yet," Verena said. Mrs. Greason gestured to the rows of benches. "They're just children. They don't care what you've done or who said what. They care if you listen, if you teach them something worth keeping. I've been through more than they'll ever know." "Good," she said. "That means you'll have something worth giving." Verena stayed 6 days. She taught letters to a boy who stuttered so badly he barely spoke, showed a girl how to hold a pen in her left hand without shame, and read aloud from a volume of Emerson until her voice cracked. On the 7th morning, she saddled her mare and rode home before the sun had fully cleared the hilltops. The wind off the plains smelled of cedar and rye, and the closer she got, the more her chest ached with something warm and certain. When she reached the clearing, Porter was kneeling in the field, pulling weeds from the new bean rows. He looked up, his face unreadable at first, then he stood brushing dirt from his knees. She didn't dismount right away, just sat there watching him, her hands still on the reins. "I'm not taking the post," she said. He stepped closer. "Why not?" "Because I don't want to lead a life that pulls me away from here. From you, you sure." "I taught for 6 days. It filled something in me. But coming back, it settled me in a way teaching never did." He reached for her stirrup, steadying the mare as she swung down. "I'll keep a few books here," she said. "Teach the neighbors' children if they want it. But this," she looked at the cabin, the trees, the smoke curling faint from the chimney. "This is where I belong." He didn't say anything, just wrapped his arms around her, and for the first time she let herself lean fully into it. That night they sat on the porch with their feet bare in the grass. The stars blinked above the treetops, and a whippoorwill called from somewhere deep in the brush. "You ever think about what comes after this?" Verena asked. "I think about building a smokehouse. Maybe putting in a root cellar." "I meant farther down, years from now." He tilted his head. "I think about growing old beside you, about watching our children run through that field and knowing they'll never have to wonder whether they're wanted." She nodded. "I want that too. And I want to be the kind of woman who can give it to them." "You already are." She reached over and took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. They sat like that, the night wrapping around them soft as wool, and neither of them moved until the stars began to fade. The summer heat came in slow, heavy waves, pressing down on the land until even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Porter had started rising before dawn to get his work in before the sun reached high. Verena, now barefoot more often than not, kept pitchers of well water cooling by layers of damp cloth, and her hands were always busy mending, mixing bread, coaxing tomatoes up from their stakes. One afternoon, she stood bent over a chipped basin outside the cabin, scrubbing the dirt from a bundle of carrots. Her hands were stained, nails rimmed with earth. When Porter returned from the northern fence line, he paused beside her, quiet a long moment. "You've taken to this place like it was always yours." "It is mine," she said, not looking up. "I just didn't know it until I'd lived a little in it." He crouched beside her, brushing the dust from his trousers with the side of his hand. His knuckles were scraped. She glanced at them, then at his face. "You hurt yourself again." Gate pins slipped. "Nothing worth fuss. You treat yourself like your bones aren't yours to keep." He gave a faint nod, not quite a smile. "Never got used to the idea of being needed." She rinsed the last of the carrots and set them on a sack to dry. "You are, every day." Later, they sat under the cottonwood by the creek, where the air moved cooler. She leaned back against the trunk, skirt tucked beneath her knees, while he shaped a length of willow into a handle for the scythe blade he'd sharpened that morning. "I was thinking," she said, watching the curve form under his knife, "we ought to start putting something aside." He looked up. "For what? For winter, for taxes, for a child?" He set the blade down and wiped his hands on his trousers. "You want one now?" "I think I do." "You sure?" "I'm sure I want one with you." She turned her head. "I've never known steadiness like this." "I think a child deserves to be born into that." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something warmer. He ran a thumb along the edge of the carved wood. "Then we'll make ready." That evening, she took down the old quilt she'd packed away in the cedar chest, a patchwork her mother had once started and never finished. Verena laid it across the bed and studied the gaps, the spaces where time had worn through. She ran her fingers over the seams and felt something shift, deep and slow, like a door opening inside her. She found Porter by lamplight, oil brush in hand, varnishing the grain bin he'd built from salvaged timber. "I want to finish the quilt," she said. "I want to do something that lasts." He set the brush aside. "Then let's mend it together." They worked by firelight for 3 nights straight, her stitching, him cutting scraps from old shirts and worn-out aprons. It came together crooked in places but strong. The fabric held. By August, the garden gave up more than they could store. Porter dug a root cellar with the help of a neighbor named Lyle, who'd brought over 2 mules and a pickaxe without being asked. Verena cooked supper for them, both cornmeal biscuits and a pan of dried apple cobbler, and listened as the 2 men talked about a new mill opening by the river bend. That night, after the dishes were rinsed and the fire banked low, Porter pulled her close in the dark, his voice quiet in her ear. "You ever miss the way things were?" "No," she said. "Not once." In the fall, they rode to the county clerk's office in Mason and signed the deed for the land in both their names. The clerk, a soft-spoken man with ink on his cuffs, watched as Verena signed with steady hand. "Most women leave it to their husbands," he said, not unkindly. "I'm not most women," she replied. Porter simply nodded, eyes fixed on her like he'd never needed proof. On the ride home, the wind shifted cooler. Verena leaned against him in the saddle, her hands resting gently over his. "Do you think we'll ever leave this place?" "No," he said. "I think we'll plant our bones right here." She looked ahead at the road, rutted and golden with dust, and saw not a path back but a life stretching forward. The first frost came early that year. They stacked wood high beside the cabin, sealed the chinks in the walls, and laid heavy quilts on the bed. Verena's belly began to swell by the second snow. Porter built a cradle from cedar planks, carved smooth and rubbed down with beeswax. He showed it to her one morning, hands still sticky with resin. "You made this?" she asked, touching the edge. "I wanted something that would outlast me." She pressed her palm to the curve of her stomach. "It will." The baby came in late March after a long, hard rain, a girl. Full-cheeked, red as a new penny, with her mother's chin and her father's eyes. They named her Clara. Porter held her first, his hands trembling as he cradled her close. "You came into the world strong," he whispered. "Just like your mama." Verena watched them, her breath shallow, tears slipping down her temples. "She'll never know what it means to be afraid. She'll know what it means to be loved," he said. As spring pushed up through the thawed ground, life settled into a new rhythm. Clara slept in a basket near the hearth, wrapped in the same quilt they'd finished together. Verena tended the garden with a cradle strapped to her chest. Porter worked the fields with quiet pride, his gaze often drifting to the cabin where his wife stood in the doorway, daughter in her arms. One afternoon, as the sun slipped low behind the ridge, Verena stepped out barefoot, holding Clara close. Porter looked up from where he was cutting seed rows. "She's watching you," Verena said. "She'll know what good work looks like. And what good love feels like," she added. He crossed to them, brushing the dirt from his hands, and kissed Verena's forehead. Then, gentle as breath, he touched Clara's tiny fingers with his. They stood there, the 3 of them, in the hush of the growing dusk. The land around them quiet, full, and theirs. And in that stillness, in that soft gold light, everything felt exactly as it should be.